welcome to the Emerging Purpose Podcast, where we explore the transformative journeys that shape our lives and help us discover our deepest purpose. I'm your host, Greg Donaldson, and each episode I dive into conversations with individuals who are dedicated to personal and collective transformation. Today, I'm honoured to welcome Dr. Marianne Murray to the show. Marianne is an accomplished practitioner in the field of transformative learning with over 2 decades of experience guiding others through change. Marianne holds master's degrees in transpersonal psychology and mindfulness-based psychotherapy, along with a doctoral degree in transformative learning and change in human systems. Her training includes certification as a Grof Breathwork facilitator. She has facilitated holotropic breathwork sessions across the globe, from the US and Europe to Kenya and India. Marianne's diverse expertise also includes certification in Bert Hellinger's systemic constellation work and training as a massage therapist. She's also a Mind and Life Fellow and makes her home in Santa Fe, New Mexico. In today's conversation, we'll explore Marianne's journey from higher education to breathwork facilitation, how practices like holotropic breathwork and psychedelics can help unfreeze emotional blockages and expand consciousness, the critical importance of creating safe, intentional spaces for personal growth and transformation, and the essential role of practitioners doing their own inner work before holding space for others. This conversation was recorded last November 2024, just before appearing on a panel discussion with Marianne, where we were investigating the question around psychedelics being able to help with the current meta-crisis. Join me as I dive into these topics with Dr. Marianne Murray. I hope you enjoy the conversation. Are you reading anything interesting at the moment?
Yeah, I just have been reading Alexander Bina's book. I don't know if it's particularly a new book, but it's a really wonderful kind of survey, I think. It just really was inspiring to me.
Yeah.
I used to be a Wilber fan, and I still am in many ways.
Ken Wilber.
And for some reason, I saw a real connection between his work and the way that Wilber was trying to see where we're going.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think it's the bigger picture, isn't it? Ali's book. Yeah, he sort of brings in a bit of Wilber, doesn't he? The integral stuff around.
Yeah, he mentions Wilber, I think. But, but there's just it kind of made me think. Oh, yeah, he's like the next generation. Coming on the heels of Wilber.
I'm sure he'd love to hear that. Yeah. So, well, thanks for agreeing to have a chat. I'd love to sort of know more about you, really. And usually, I call this podcast the Emerging Purpose Podcast because I'm deeply fascinated in purpose and whether it is a thing or whether it's useful and whether it's a useful term for people. I actually call it the Emerging Purpose Podcast because I myself feel like purpose is an emergent thing, and it's it kind of comes and goes and in different areas of our life. And so I'd be interested to hear a little bit about how you've come to do what you do. And you can go into that as much as you like, really. I mean, the thing that sort of strikes me the most is the thing about you spent quite a long time being a holotropic breathwork facilitator, right?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a lovely question to ask somebody. I mean, I'm like in the last phases of my life. I'm 75 years old, so I'm kind of have a bit of perspective on how I got there. And I think purpose is an interesting word. I think a little bit about motivation too, how those all, what guides us. And Yeah, so I got into holotropic breathwork kind of backwards, but it was a very timely moment when I was feeling that kind of early 40s, that 40s age-wise,
Mm-hmm.
40s stuck, what's my purpose? What's calling me? What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
And it was a really dynamic, interesting shift in my perspective about who I was and how I was as a human being. I've been just dabbling in meditation and other practices and looking at a career that had been in higher education, publication, that kind of thing, not
I
as an
see.
educator, but as an administrator. And it just took me into a very, very different way of seeing and being. And that actually led me into studying transformational learning,
Really?
adult learning, that it really shifts our perspective, and hence Wilbur et al.,
Uh-huh.
who are really looking at these things. And so it was a combination of seeing how are we learning intellectually, emotionally, and through our whole body, because breathwork is a very embodied somatic practice. So
Mm-hmm.
it just took me to a whole different way of understanding how we grow and change.
Yeah. So there was this sort of sense in your life that you were in education, and you'd kind of got to your 40s, and then you sort of had this sense that something needed to change, or you were feeling stuck or something.
I think I've always had an altruistic thread, but what does that mean? What is it to be an altruistic human being? Where do you put that energy? And I certainly am not a political human being. I mean, in another body, in another lifetime, I might have gone into local and politics, but
Mm-hmm.
that's just not who I am this time. But the idea, can we actually support ourselves and others in changing and finding our ways? And so, having gone through a deep change myself in that process,
Mm-hmm.
taking myself into change and understanding a little bit more now at this end of it, what it takes to go through those kind of really big changes.
Mm.
Yeah.
So like a
Can
sort
take
of tectonic plates are shifting in sort of those times in your
right,
lives, and it's kind
right.
of how you respond to
You
that.
know,
You mean?
absolutely. Yeah, I think, how do we willingly take ourselves into the unknown? I guess
Oh
is where,
yeah.
and I think it's very relevant to the conversation about psychedelic work. It perforce takes us into the unknown. I think we can do that in more slow and more methodical ways. But I think it has I think when you talk about purpose, and I think about motive
Mm-hmm.
in relation to purpose, what is the energy that takes us into a willingness to be changed, actually? I guess I'd say it's not just changes. Can I open myself to be changed?
Absolutely, because I suppose part of the sort of painful reaction to change can be the resistance part,
Right.
and that
Right.
and the kind of like holding on to what is known, right? Mm.
Exactly. There's a theorist in the field of transformative learning and change. His name is Jack Mesereau.
Mm-hmm.
He's kind of like the 90s, I guess, 1990s. But he was one of the first ones to really talk about the disorienting dilemma, what he called the disorienting dilemma,
Mm-hmm.
and that it's essential to disorient from what we know, from belief structures, kind of cognitive structures, in order to become something other than what we were, and that the gravitational pull of those structures is huge. So, what are the means by which we can actually allow ourselves to disconnect from them, and what gives us the capacity and tolerance to be in that level of disorientation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, that's when structures are falling in the tarot. There's that sort of the kind of
Mm.
the tower, isn't there? And it's like when the tower is falling down, it's like, oh yeah, how are you going to kind of let the tower fall down and it doesn't necessarily feel that easy when it's actually happening, right?
No, I think we've called it various things ranging from psychosis to,
Yeah.
I mean, it can all, Grof, who is the founder of holotropic breathwork, Stanislav Grof, speaks about spiritual emergency. And I think often that degree of disorientation looks like something that verges on madness, or a deep spiritual crisis.
Absolutely, yeah.
Takes us into that level of change.
Well, it certainly feels like a kind of nicer term than psychosis, doesn't it? Not nicer, but like kind of more forgiving in some ways. Like maybe it's a rite of passage, or there's something that's kind of that we can learn or go with in terms of a spiritual emergency.
Right. And sometimes there are psychotic elements to that. It's not to say there aren't, but it can take us to the edge of our mental stability too. So hence, I mean, that takes us into what are the structures that hold us going into those kinds of, when we want to take ourselves into the unknown in that way. And my way has been holotropic breathwork or Grof Breathwork.
Yeah.
I've also, I have a history with psychedelics, but I don't practice with psychedelics.
Sure.
But I think psychedelics are a doorway in that direction.
I mean, I certainly want to talk about psychedelics because we're doing a panel in a couple of weeks. I mean, this might go out after that panel, but I'm fascinated to hear your thoughts on that. Just before we go, I mean, maybe it's not separate anyway, but it's there's something about Grof breathwork, holotropic breathwork, right? That, if I'm right, came about because of the kind of closing down of psychedelic research.
That's right. Yeah. So Grof was at Esalen Institute on the west coast of the U.S., a very dynamic and creative center, and he was a scholar in residence there. And he and his then wife Christina's no longer alive, were running groups with people, with speakers and talking about his research with psychedelics. So Grof was for those who don't know, was a Czech psychiatrist who moved to the U.S. To continue his work with studying LSD and the psychiatric applications of LSD. So, I mean, he'd done a huge amount of work over the years, over the 60s and into the early 70s, into the 60s, 50s.
One of the pioneers of
Absolutely. Yeah. So he, after LSD research was no longer possible, he came to Esalen and was writing his books and then working with groups of people who often would ask him, can we try psychedelics? And of course they couldn't. So they, it's a bit of a story, but the breathwork grew out of his work with the psychedelic studies with his patients. And he was thinking, how can we work with people, take people into a place that is, not the same, but it's still what I would call an expanded state of consciousness. And he'd noticed in sessions with his patients that quite often when they were encountering some difficult material in their journeys, in their psychedelic sessions, they'd accelerate their breathing. For those of us who've been in that work, you kind of know you can push your way through some difficult stuff if you breathe into it, as it were. And then he also knew, of course, that there are many practices all around the world in many communities, from spiritual communities to tribal communities, where breathing of one kind or another, chanting or dancing or, that kind of using the breath. And there's yogas of the breath. So, the breath is a very powerful catalyst. So he looked at the breath, he included music to help power the breath through. And then he also realized that you could work as a facilitator, you can kind of work with a participant's body a little bit if they want resistance or something in the session, something to push against in order to really push through an experience. And so it came together into a form that we now know as holotropic or Grof Breathwork.
Yeah.
Holotropic breathwork.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a very particular form. So I'll just say that. It's a very particular form that I think, so I don't want to bypass the fact that the form and the way it's held and the preparation and the integration of that breath work, it's a whole piece. And his emphasis has always been on how do you hold that work in a way that's safe. In other words, the set and setting with impeccability, so that that experience is well held. Because there's many, many different types of breath work. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I think is notable about holotropic breathwork is the way that it's presented and held.
Mm-hmm. No, it's absolutely. I mean, on a personal experience, I did a training as a psychedelic guide for Imperial College in London.
Yeah.
And one part of the training was actually to do a holotropic breathwork session for each other. So we sat for each other while we were going through the sort of session. And it was, it was incredible. It was incredible. Really loud music, like, seemed to be part of it. And this sort of sense that you are free to, I mean, you have to really go for the breathing, I've noticed. Mm-hmm. It's like really push it and kind of, like, even if you go, it's work, it's a lot of work. And there was, I can't remember what it's called, when you get almost like too much oxygen in you and you sort of cramp up a bit.
They call it tetany.
That's it. Yeah. And that sort of sense of like being able to kind of, feel into yourself and let things go. And the whole room, there were like people really letting go, and really having experiences, and other people just sort of quietly. And it sort of reminded me in some ways of groups of people doing psilocybin on psilocybin retreats. It's very similar in a way. There's people going through all sorts of different either ecstasies or traumas, and to be able to sit with people and kind of witness them and hold them through that is a kind of incredible part of the training, in fact, to be a psychedelic guide. In terms of your how did that begin for you then? Like that you kind of heard about it and kind of went along to, or how did it?
Well, I had a friend who'd experienced breathwork, and she brought a facilitator to the town where I lived at the time. And it took me a while to get it. I mean, it was kind of interesting. It was way outside my my range of experience. But I started reading Grof's writing, which helped, and met Grof. I was very fortunate to. I mean, this was back in the early 1990s, so he was still teaching, and got to experience him at Esalen, which was really wonderful. So. I think it's kind of interesting, Greg, because I was physical. I was a hiker, climber, backpacker, outdoors runner type for many, many years at that time. So I knew my body, but I had no idea what my body held in terms of life experience and, early childhood. And, the whole possibility with this kind of work, as you said, it can get quite big and expressive, and kind of the possibility that through I like to call it the medicine of the breath, with and the holding of the space, the space to really allow one's body to express. And I think of it as unfreezing what got frozen at various times in our lives. And so I was really fascinated by this, and I was also fascinated with Grof's, what he calls his cartography of consciousness, which includes, at that time it was a very novel idea, not so much now, but that the trauma of birth, of gestation and birth, what impacts us as in the fetal stages of our existence is still held in our bodies, still held in our kind of somatic memory.
Mm.
So I found that fascinating. And then I think the breathwork was one of the first places where I really could understand what he talks about as the transpersonal experience. And so they're all kind of like, it's like a matrix of experience, but that one can have these layers of experience that can be both incredibly expansive, incredibly physical, deeply emotional, very quiet, all of this range within their long sessions, 2.5, 3 hour session. Yeah. It was just like somebody threw open a door for me as a way to start understanding my experience, my human experience, really.
Yeah. And that obviously took you further into that. You followed that. You sort of followed that thread.
I did. I just got really, really interested. A lot of this work is held in a therapeutic context. I tend to hold it in a learning context.
Yeah.
It's like, which is not to say is at odds with healing, but what are we learning? What are we learning?
Absolutely. Yeah. I saw that you have a master's in transpersonal psychology.
Mm.
Yeah. So was that something that you already had that, or that was part
No, of? No, I'm a late bloomer. I got my advanced degrees later, all around the same time. I'm sure astrologically something was going on out there, but so I did the breath work and the master's and then the PhD and then another master's.
Oh, the PhD as well. Yeah. What was the PhD in?
In transformative learning and change.
Transformative learning and change.
In human systems. Yeah.
My gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Which is it was an edgy field in California Institute of Integral Studies is one of those universities that's kind of pushing the edges in understanding transpersonal and somatic ways of working. So it was a good place for me to land.
Nice. Yeah. So it sounds like an incredible sort of when those tectonic plates shifted, there was something opened up, and you kind of a whole new world opened up for you. Yeah. Right. In terms of like your psychedelic experience, you were saying your psychedelic. Did you have psychedelic experiences before you'd done the breath work? Was that something you'd had before?
Yeah, I was born in. I grew up in the 60s.
In California?
In England, by the way.
Oh, in England? Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah. So, I encountered psychedelics at that time.
Yeah.
As a young art student,
right.
And just actually I had a pretty, what I would now call a spiritual emergency at that time. I didn't know what it was. I thought I was going bonkers, and it was kind of triggered with dabbling around with psychedelics at that time. I didn't hold it well, and so I think like many, it was like the bad, the shadow, the perils of that work when it's not held well and there's no context. And so I think I was far from alone in that experience. Oh, exactly. But I kind of segmented that. And so when I came to the breath work in my early 40s, I was already starting to reconnect with psychedelics slightly, but in a much more structured form, with a sitter. And, but I think it was through Grof's work that I started to understand what my experience had been then. Because it was one of those experiences when you kind of crack open and what you see is way too big for what you can hold, as a young adult. And so then as I got into the breath work, understood Grof's work, I also started to work with psychedelics in structured groups and so my own process. And I have a great respect for psychedelic work. I've used it both ceremonially as in ayahuasca, ceremony, and I find that very, very powerful. And having been in a beautifully held sacred spaces, and also in a more therapeutic setting, and I've kind of landed at the place where, having sat for people in various times, it's not my work. The breath work is my work.
Yeah.
But I feel it's incredibly complementary to the psychedelic work, and I have a great respect for what's happening. Well, I have a great respect for many of the people I know who are working with psychedelics.
I mean, that's the sort of danger, isn't it, of the Renaissance in a way. There's like the kind of gold rush feel about it in a way. Like there's a lot of people who are very overexcited about it, and also there's some I guess there's some dangers that come along with that.
I think so.
Yeah.
The breathwork has become, in this country, in the US, has become, and I think it probably is too in the UK with people like Tim Reed and Maria Papaspiro, who are using breathwork as a kind of training ground, really, for there are people who want to go into psychedelic therapy. And so I'm now working with a training program here for facilitators of Grof Breathwork. And many, many of the people who are in that training program are people who hope at some point to be able to work with psychedelics legally. And
I mean, there's so much, isn't there? There's so many places we can go in our conversation, and I guess there's something about this panel that we're going to be talking, that there's a kind of focus in terms of like, there's a very big question actually in terms of like global evolution and or healing the collective.
Healing the collective.
Yeah, healing the collective, and this kind of sense of, can psychedelics, help humanity in terms of like to evolve, and it's interesting hearing you talk about holotropic breathwork, because it sounds like when you were talking about unfreezing and going into parts and kind of I can't help but think of sort of the microcosm, the macrocosm, in terms of like how, in terms of we talk about, and also the individualist ourselves and the kind of illnesses or the traumas that we hold, and wonder whether that's also a key to what's going on the planet. I mean, that's quite a big kind of thought. Do you have any ideas around that?
Well, what I hear you saying, Greg, if I'm right, is like, can we see the collective freezes and the collective traumas and the kind of body of the human realm on this planet? I don't know that I work so much at the individual level, and I do really subscribe to the fact that we do have to do our own work. But I think one of the things I love about the breathwork, Grof's work, is that it's a group process. It's not a one-on-one process. So at least to that degree, there's a kind of group field that's at work. And I think, to me, one of the big questions around this is, how do we not go into our own echo chambers around what's happening with the psychedelic renaissance or breathwork for that matter? How do we keep porous edges, as it were, to the bodies of work that we're working with, so that we're constantly relating in relationship with the larger field? Because I think I don't know. There's a track that I could follow, probably down a rabbit hole, but I think what you're saying is, how do we look at the body, the human collective body?
Yeah.
Can this kind of work that's done so individually or in such small groups have an impact at that level?
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose that's my own wondering in terms of like, how we work with our own trauma and work with our own freezes, and where we're stuck, and sort of hope in a way that does have if we do unfreeze that, or we do find ways to kind of relax, then does that give us the motivation or purpose in a way, to then look out into what we're doing in the world, or how how humanity is, using its resources, or using its people, or using, I mean, I suppose I'm trying to answer my own question in a way, but I'm sort of, I want to know what you think in terms of, we're living in a sort of meta crisis, as it's been called, and it's kind of like, so how is this work? How is holotropic breathwork? How are psychedelics? Do you think they can be helpful in this kind of collective healing, if they can, or in this lifetime, indeed,
Wow.
Sorry.
I think it's only 9:30 in the morning here.
Oh, is it? Okay, right. Yeah, sure. Sorry, it's about 5 o'clock here. Let's go slow. It's like a morning philosophy question for you. But
I think we have to remember that we're part of a bigger, what I do think is a bigger impulse in human evolution. I do believe that humanity is, I mean, for better and for worse, is evolving. And I think our intellectual capacities are obviously what we make and what we come up with are sometimes frighteningly evolving, and sometimes brilliantly. And I think probably our emotional, I'm not a evolutionary theorist, so I can't say that, but I do feel that any way we contribute to our capacity for holding intellectual complexity, for holding emotional complexity, for tolerating difference, for opening ourselves, opening our capacity to sit in discomfort, to come back to the disorienting dilemma, growing our capacity to be humane and heartful in the face of discomfort. I think anything that contributes to that is a piece of the picture. And I think, how do we keep foregrounding those capacities? And so I do think psychedelics can contribute to that. I don't think it's a given conclusion that that's what they will do. But I think well held, again, it's the intention, the holding the space, the how we work with what we learn from them.
I mean, it's interesting, having worked as a guide for quite a while now anyway. There's a sort of sense, and maybe this is just kind of like skewed data or whatever, but it's, for me, there's a sort of sense that whenever I work with someone who's working with medicine of some kind, there's this, it comes back to the kind of like two things, and maybe that's just a bit reductive, but there's like, it feels like it always comes back to something around connection to others and connection to nature, and there's a sort of respect that for and a need for those two things that often people kind of have that experience on psychedelics, like, it's just like an experience with a tree, or just being in nature somehow and realizing that we're all part of it, and that what we're doing, kind of cutting ourselves off from it and making us, as in humans, kind of separate from it. And a really important part of that feels like it's about, we talk a lot about integration and about how, because you can have those experiences, much like you sort of said, you had that early experience with psychedelics and your mind's blown open, you're shown something, and then it kind of closes up again, and you just have to get on with your life, just daily life. And what are your thoughts about the kind of, I suppose, is it the same kind of thing in terms of like the the holotropic side of things, in terms of like that's where people come to in an understanding of nature, and also you mentioned about doing that in groups as well. Is that a sort of theme that goes through that as well?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I think the territory is not so different.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think there are different aspects of it, but um, I think our natural propensity for opening is there if we support that. Um, Definitely. I mean, one of the things that I hear often is the experience of, like the experience of all mothers' loss over time, or the experience of the natural world, the degradation of the natural world. So those transpersonal experiences that are big and that are very powerful. Definitely, yeah, absolutely part of the holotropic experience as well. And I think, and again, I think how we hold that following the experience. What is your role as a therapist? I mean, I thank God you're doing what you do, Greg, because I mean, I think that's how do we hold that without contracting around the pain of it, or contracting around the lack of recognition of that by everybody else we meet when we're back in our lives? How do we not feel isolated with that kind of understanding, but can stay relational? Yeah. So I think it's like, how do we create the holding spaces for these experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I suppose as you know, just as you were saying that, and something came to me about this idea. It's like sometimes we have it. It seems like we have it back to front. It almost like that. There's this sense that there's a mental health crisis, and that people are anxious and depressed, and that if we sort that out, then everything else might get sorted out in some ways. And then it always occurs to me, it comes back, and I'm sure this is something that's kind of been researched or thought about, I'm sure of it, is that in a way depression and anxiety are a kind of actually a kind of healthy response to what is going on in the world.
I couldn't agree with you more. I absolutely agree with it. I mean, one of the things that I feel to say to people, because a lot of people who come to the breath work that we do are, I mean, look at the diagnosis. People fill out a health questionnaire, and there's a list of meds you're taking, and I think you're more sane.
Yeah.
In this moment, it's a natural response to a really, well, as we call it, a meta crisis. I mean, a time of deep disturbance.
Yeah.
And collective.
Yeah. So in that kind of thinking along those lines, I wonder if it's similar, or you feel the same way about actually, well, if that's the correct response to what's going on, then actually let's just like make space for that to be there, rather than kind of like trying to exile it away as like this problem that you've got, and you've got to get better in order to be a good little worker to go out to work back into the kind of capitalist or consumerist society.
It's a hard one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I mean, I think if you really, I mean, again, one of the things I love about and feel about the Grof's breathwork is that it does give you a place to really drop in deeply and see what is the true massiveness of that depression or that grief, which is often grief and often rage, and to give that some kind of expression. I mean, I can't tell you how many times there've been men who've come to a workshop who said, I can't express myself, it's not safe. And to be given the support to really express the outrage of having been told to be who they were meant to be. I mean, I don't want to isolate men, the women and many of us come with things, but I think that's a particularly relevant experience for many men, is that there's just the fullness of physical and emotional and energetic expression is never has a place once you've turned a certain age, and and then what happens to it? It goes into depression.
Yeah, something calcifies maybe. That's really It's really interesting to think of that in a way, because it's kind of like what I hear you kind of saying there is like, it's a space, and I suppose I imagine you're saying this about psychedelics and transformative work as well as holotropic breathwork, that there's you're offered a space to go into those dark crevices or those places that you've frozen up because of society's decided that you're either a man that you have to think this, or a woman that you think this, or whatever. Like, this is the kind of person you have to be in order to be accepted as a human being, and we're actually going to hold a space for you where you don't have to do that. You can let it go, and it's safe to do that.
And that is a disorientation. Yeah. I mean, it's right there. It's like, what ground am I standing on? Who am I, in a way, when I allow myself to feel that? So there is something, you take yourself into a potential for change. I mean, Grof, the word holotropic means, as Grof coined it, means moving towards wholeness.
Uh-huh.
And that was very much his view in creating that work, was that we recover aspects of ourselves, or we uncover aspects of ourselves and our nature that we hadn't known. And he also calls it the adventure of self-discovery, which I love, So it's like, how do we become more whole or more fully ourselves, and in relationship with others?
Yeah, that's really nice. I was just wondering then, as you were saying that as well, I was like wondering if there's something about creativity in that, or there's some connection to creativity in terms of once one lets themselves become whole, or at least allows an expanding into wholeness. I don't suppose you ever become completely whole. Maybe that's kind of when you die. I don't know, or when you go to the next one. But yeah, I wonder, do you think there might be a relationship to creativity in there somewhere, and therefore something about how we might be able to get creative about getting ourselves out of this kind of crisis? Do you think we will get out of this crisis?
Oh, Greg, that's...
I'm so sorry. I know it's early where you are. It's a big question.
Well, first of all, creativity, yes, I absolutely do think we're connected to I think creativity does get liberated. I mean, whether it's literally some kind of classic form of creativity like writing or art, but I think just thinking creatively, or seeing things in ways that we wouldn't normally have thought about them. Yeah, absolutely. And again, Stan Grof would say, absolutely, he was fascinated by the possibility that these kinds of states lead us into deep creative possibilities, Yeah.
Yeah. So when you talk...
I think we'll ever get out of the mess. I just want to... full disclosure, I think we're going to go through a hell of a mess as a humans. And the more resources we have in order to navigate that, the better. But are we going to avoid it? I don't know. I think we're already in it.
Yeah, we're pretty deep in it, aren't we? It's hard, isn't it? It's hard not to. It's a tricky one to become defeated by that. But maybe it's more about looking at something around. Actually, it's all. I love Ram Dass. He's he's one of my sort of great teachers, and I sort of always remember a story he told about going to India and seeing the absolute poverty and devastation, and the kind of all of the, just the sort of everything in life is kind of on show there in terms of the range of human experience, and how it sort of touched him, and he couldn't bear it in a way. And he'd go to his guru, and the guru would say, well, can't you just see that it's all perfect? which is kind of a strange thing feels like a sort of strange thing to say to the Western mind in a way, because it's a bit like, oh, what, you mean suffering and degradation is all perfect? And yet I can't help but think, well, maybe we're here, we are in the mess. Trump is just coming back into power. There's something that's we as human beings are still wanting to push forward in that way. Like it's from our own, it's from us. It's not different, is it? It's not. Right. So I don't know. That was a really long way of kind of saying, is it all that we just, maybe the mess is part of what we have to endure as well, the suffering as well as the ecstasy, and the creativity and the yeah.
And yet I don't think we can ever stop, in my view, trying to prevent suffering.
Right. Well, I suppose that's the difference. Yeah. Rather than giving up, you mean?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting. There's a new movie out called Conclave.
Oh yeah.
Have you seen it about that? Yeah.
No.
So there's a priest in that it's a story about the conclave of creating the new pope, and he just gives a beautiful monologue towards the end of the movie. I won't tell you anything about the story because
no spoilers.
It's not really good, and it would be a big spoiler. But it's just a beautiful reminder that we could get so embedded in our daily, the fear of Trump, and believe me, it's rocked many communities here, as I'm sure it has. But to make that the only thing you see, we can't do that. We have to understand that actually we can't lose purpose. Mm-hmm. We can't lose the connection with I would call it our heart's purpose. If we've had that okay, there you go. There's a link. If I've actually had a fully deep, profound immersion in what it is to be open-hearted and connected with this planet and with life and with the beauty of being alive in a session. I mean, if that's something that's been granted to me, if you like, in some way, through some means, the loss, if I lose contact with that, then I lose part of my own humanity. And I think that's where my purpose arises from.
Yeah.
That would be.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? I mean, it's so difficult. I mean, I found in my own personal life, it's like, and also I hear a lot of people say it, it's like, I'm just going to turn off the news and I'm not going to listen because I can't bear it. I can't bear that channel of bad news. And I kind of get it in a way, because it's about, maybe that's about just like being bombarded by information and being bombarded by a certain, corporation's kind of version of the news. And it's a kind of a wish to switch it off, so I don't. But there's an extra bit in there where I think is like, if I don't think about it, I don't have to like deal with it, And recently I had a real experience in actually a kind of turnaround on that for myself, because it's like, you can't. That feels hopeless. That just sort of feels hopeless, or like I'm ignoring something,
Right.
And actually. Things like it's interesting because I'd sort of given up on going to marches and thinking, that's for the young people. They go to the marches and do all that sort of stuff. And then I sort of realized there was this march I went to that it doesn't really even matter, or not that it doesn't matter, but it's not about, I don't know if I believe that this march will change things. But what it does do is it allows a lot of people to be together in kind of a grief or anger or upset. Yes. And there's a sort of and in that collective feeling, there's a healing and a sense of like, there is possibility because we're here. We all want. Why can't and why can't we? Why can't there be optimism? And why So I
Absolutely.
really get you. In that terms. Don't give up on the purpose of it.
And you lose a part of yourself if you're shutting it off.
Yeah.
Yeah. if you can't feel, period.
Yeah, and maybe that comes back to the thing about, like, you know, being depressed. It's literally like you have to sort of press it away, and so in a sense, like coming to holotropic breathwork or psychedelics, you're sort of saying, you don't really need to press it away. Maybe you could like allow it to come out and see it as it is. There is suffering, yeah, and cry all the tears that you need to cry. And let it come out, and then on the other side of that, there is a sort of, there can be relief and hope and connection as well.
Yeah. And one other thing in that mix is that in those spaces, I think we can encounter the things that distort our feelings. So, for example, if I feel victimized by what's happening, sometimes in those non-ordinary spaces, the psychedelics or breathwork, I can actually encounter the part of me that gets wrapped up in that kind of victim mind.
Yeah.
And or resentful mind, or those things that get triggered because they're deep. You know, they're part of my biography, or my, you know, they're the trigger point in myself. So if I can address or get to know those parts of myself, then I actually liberate some energy.
Yeah.
Liberate. So I think there is some healing work or some psychotherapeutic work that can get done that actually avoids us distorting our response to some of what's going on.
Yeah.
In a personal way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So getting a sort of like putting your flag in, like, this is me. And kind of saying, no, I'm here. There's something. I feel like what you're saying is there's something more about kind of, not getting. I suppose that's it, isn't it? You just get into oppositional thinking, and then it's like, then it's as bad as being kind of on either side. It doesn't really matter, because it's just you chucking stuff into the argument or into the fire somehow.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a kind of supervisor who always. I'm coming more around to this idea now. Like, it's like this idea that, yeah, you know, if you get really angry towards Trump and you get really like oppositional and you get really, you know, you're sort of like adding fuel to the fire, rather than, you know, can you put a picture of Trump on your altar, or can you know where your inner Trump is, you know, or where, and it's like, oh, that suddenly opens up whole other aspects, doesn't it, of possibility of like how we've got to where we're getting to.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's tricky, you know. It's not relativism. It's actually, it's a really deep practice to be able to do that, I think.
Yeah. So, is there something that you would have liked me to ask you, you know, in terms of like this sort of sense of like psychedelics in healing the collective? Is there something that you feel like I might have missed in terms of some thoughts you might have about it?
I think the one place I'd like to not miss is about who we are who hold those spaces.
Okay.
With people. I just think it's so important, Greg, that those of us who hold space for people in non-ordinary states have really done our own work and really understand what can happen in those spaces. And I think that is one of the dangers of the psychedelic renaissance, is there are a lot of people who've never had experience with a substance that brings a non-ordinary state in order to hold space for other people. And I think damage happens, and, you know, so I just want to not bypass that part of it. I think what are the right spaces? And I love what Alexander says about the different spaces. So there's therapeutic spaces, but also the ritual spaces, or the quote religious spaces, the spiritual spaces, and that we hold people really intentionally. And there are those of us who work well in one area and others who work well in another, but that we're as impeccable as we can be in holding those spaces.
Absolutely.
And hold each other accountable in doing so. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so good to hear, isn't it? I mean, it's so good that you said that. I think it's a sort of tempting. It's funny actually. My own journey into becoming a guide was I was very reticent about it actually, because it felt like it's interesting as it becomes like a thing to do, like a cool thing to do. Like, oh yeah, I want to be I've had all these experiences and I want to go and do this. And I remember actually having a bit of a realization that actually it feels kind of better to be reticent or reluctant around doing it, because you're not sort of getting on the gravy train and going, oh yeah, let's just, like, everyone should take it and let's go and do these things. And it's kind of a bit dangerous, isn't it, to kind of get on those big waves like that. And
we've probably all done that.
We've all done it at some point. Yeah,
yeah.
But to be careful of that, the sort of the image of what that can be, I suppose.
And to realize the power we hold in people's minds as, and especially when you have the label of a kind of mental health or professional or a medical professional underscoring that.
One thing I also like to say to a lot of my clients is, if they, or people that come with that kind of like look in their eye, like, I really want to do this, is something I really want to do, it's like, this will be the thing that's going to heal me. It's like, can we try and normalize it a little bit? It might be yoga that does it, or it might be holotropic breathwork that does it, or it might be going to church or going for a walk on a site or whatever. There's like, this thing becomes kind of, psychedelics becomes like the silver bullet, it's like the thing that's going to do it. And of course they are really they can be really transformational tools, but maybe not everyone needs to go in that door. It can be many doors, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Marianne. It's really good to talk to you, and I'm really so grateful that you can make the time that we can have this conversation. So
thank you, Greg. You made it easy, and I really appreciate that. Yeah, it's been delightful to talk with you.
That wraps up our conversation with Marianne Murray on today's episode of the Emerging Purpose podcast. I really hope her insights resonated with you as much as they did with me. If you found value in today's discussion and want to support the show, please consider becoming a Patreon at patreon.com/Emerging Purpose podcast. Your support helps us continue bringing you meaningful conversations with incredible guests who are making a difference in the world. Thank you for listening, and until next time, keep exploring your emerging purpose.